Welcome to GDOC 2020. Now, many of you are probably creating or working on your own games, but some of you might feel as if though you don't have enough street cred to make a game on the topic that you're actually making the game about. It might be freaking you out to know that your game is going to be representing a huge group. So if that's how you feel, we're here to let you know that our next presenter is going to tell you why you shouldn't worry about it. Sisi is a narrative designer, writer, and their own worst critic. They have shipped critically acclaimed games such as LIONKILLER and Signs of the Sojourner. They are also an occasional games journalist. Sisi is here to tell you why authenticity is balls.
Okay, so about me. My pronouns are they, them, and I am an IGF-nominated writer, narrative designer. I was the sole developer behind LIONKILLER. I was a writer on Signs of Sojourner, and one of the games that's going to be exhibiting at Game Devs of Color, 1000 Deaths. I actually was the lead narrative designer for that, so I really hope that you'll go and check them out. And I also have bylines on Kotaku and Bullet Points. So I'm also occasionally a game reviewer. Okay, so first off, I know that this is a talk about deconstructing the notion of authenticity, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we care so much about authenticity, or at least I hope that you care. But I think that a lot of people get really complicated about authenticity because we actually care about the communities that we come from. We have an awareness that our art has an impact on the world. And I think that's coming from a good place. I think we should nurture that instinct because I think it's better to have that sense than not. So even though I will be criticizing the notion of authenticity, I think that all of these feelings are coming from a really good place. So as I said before, I was the sole narrative designer, writer, all-around developer on LIONKILLER, which was nominated for the Excellence in Narrative Award this year at Independent Games Festival. And the premise was queer Mulan set during the First Opium War. And obviously nothing about the entire premise of the game screams authenticity to the original ballad or any adaptation that you've ever heard of. And so when I was first developing this game, because it was a lot of iterations on concepts and ideas, because I was I'm not going to change this later, so I have to make sure that I get all of the themes in order before I start. So first of all, I had to figure out who is Mulan, and this is actually a much more complicated question than it originally seems, because Disney's 1998 Mulan is Cantonese, and at least I think it's Cantonese because the name is Fa Mulan, which is a southern, the southern way of saying the name, and the northern version is Hua Mulan, and there is a lot of debate, as I would say, about who Mulan is, who she belongs to, and the answer is just it's complicated because the story has just been around for a long time. So I actually had to, even before I could really start making the game, I had to decide who's the real Mulan, who do I canonize, who's the one that I'm using. Because even though this is a totally alternate universe interpretation of Mulan, it's still when we create something, we have canonical power over adding something to the canon. So this is kind of an important question for me. Okay, so after a while when I was really doing research for this game, I realized that she might not even be Han Chinese. And for anyone who's not familiar, Han Chinese refers to the most populous ethnic group in China. When you think of Chinese people, you're probably chances are thinking of Han Chinese people. So but it's actually a specific ethnic group within China, and not all Chinese people are Han. So it's but basically is she even from the predominant Chinese group? And I think no, because Mulan is actually a translation of Mulan, which is a Manchu word for a method of hunting deer. And the Manchu emperor established the Mulan hunting preserve. And to me, that's a nod to if a hunting preserve is named Mulan, it's a nod to the word's origins, in my opinion. And the fact that Mulan is very good with horses, the original ballad is very it talks about the fact that she's good with horses. And to me, that does not seem like that is to me that's not really an indicator necessarily that she's from the predominant like I guess like biggest ethnic group, because like Han Chinese culture is very centered on agriculture, settled agriculture, like land based agriculture. So to me, like the fact that she's good with horses is like suggestive of like she's probably from like some like an ethnic minority group from the north or like the northwest, or like just like basically the Central Asian area, because like a lot of people who are from certain cultural groups like don't do settled agriculture. They have a lot better, like have a much more robust history with horses. So like even the basic assumption that a lot of people have about the Mulan story, it's like it's complicated. And so this just brought me back to like a big another complicated question about what does it mean to be authentically Chinese? Please let me know if you find out, because I haven't figured it out. There are at least 55 officially recognized ethnic groups in China. And that's just the ones that like the government officially recognizes. I mean, I'm sure there are like some other cultural groups that are like maybe too undercounted, or like it's too like politically complicated. Like I'm willing for there to be more, but there are at least 55 officially ethnic groups. And and then even beyond like the country, are immigrant Asians, are like immigrant Chinese people considered authentic? And I mean, it's a whole. I mean, there's an entire field of study dedicated to this question. Is like queerness authentic? And like I mean, like this is again much really complicated questions surrounding like how Chineseness, like even Chineseness, like not even getting into like Pan-Asianists, but like Chinese identity is a political construct. It's like there's so many different ways you can even construct like who is and isn't authentic. And then we have to think about who is typically excluded from authenticity. Because I have a lot of mixed race friends who are from like two like an Asian cultural group and also another marginalized cultural group. And like and then there are like mixed friends who are like who are like mixed with white, and then it just being mixed, like just like based on like having like friends who like struggle a lot, it's like there's like a whole different like complication with people who are come from like different cultural groups. And then there are like the fact that queerness makes like it's like, and then queerness really complicates that even more, because when even if you have assumptions of like love like model minority family values or like authentically Asian, even if you think that way, that just does not apply to a lot of queer people who just like don't necessarily have the similar structure, family structure, to even have a traditional patriarchal family structure. And so like, and then when you really think about it, queer people have from the societies that don't necessarily like I guess center them will always have to invent their own culture. And so it's like, is invented culture legitimate? Is it part of is it part of the big narrative of who is and isn't part of the in group? And so I think this authenticity question is important because it's fundamentally a question about who is and isn't allowed to make art. And I know that like the right thing to say is that like everyone is like everyone is allowed to make art, but in practice our communities are constantly having dialogue about how who should be making art. Like even though the right answer is that are people on the margins allowed to make art? Yes, but we still are having conversations about like who is authentic enough to be making art about this thing. So, and I think that's where we have to start thinking about how it's impossible to be authentic to every kind of experience. I cannot be authentic to 55 ethnic groups, and I will not try to be authentic to 55 very different ethnic groups. And my other point is that authenticity is the most easily achieved by cisgender, heterosexual, non-mixed, and uncomplicated individuals. Because I got a history degree in college, but I also got an Asian American studies degree in college. And so I read a lot of discourse about how the foundational father of like Chinese American like playwright, like this guy had like an entire beef with like kind of like the foundational Chinese American woman writer because he thought that she was inauthentic. He thought that she was playing up the like self-orientation for the white audience. And to me, I recognize that as a matter of not just a matter of difference of opinion, but it was a difference in power. And that they're like, and then like cis men will police women of color on matters of authenticity. And I see it on the internet. I don't just see it in the academic discourse, but also on the internet. Or like there are a lot of cisgender heterosexual people who don't recognize queer cultures as an authentic part of like the like authentic culture. And to me, that's really troubling because do we only want uncomplicated art to exist? And I just think as an artist, like I don't know what your stance on art is, but I just think that uncomplicated art must exist because that's how we push our medium forward. But a lot of people are like, they really struggle to accept uncomplicated art. I mean, complicated art. And that brings me to where, like, after a while, like, this is as I was saying earlier, I refuse to represent over 1 billion Chinese people and like another 30 million overseas. That's just not going to happen. Like, I really think that when you're marginalized, your job isn't to be everyone. It's to open doors for everyone. It's to make sure that anybody who wants to create art can create art. And if you help as many people create art as possible, then you're not really saddled with this like burden of representation. You can just make whatever you want. And I think every day it's just constantly important to strive towards a art landscape where people can make whatever they want. Like, and not think about whether it's tropey or stereotypical. So, Lion Killer was pretty generally very well reviewed, but there was one constant compliment that I kind of took issue with, and I try not to look a gift horse in the mouth. Like, I will always like accept a good review as a good review, but a lot of people called it authentic. I was just kind of like, wait, I made a Mulan game about the first Opium War, and you're telling me it's authentic? Like, it feels a little backhanded because it's like I obviously made it up. Like, I made up so many things. And it almost feels like I'm being praised for being Chinese and making Chinese art. And it makes me wonder, would I also be praised if I was making art based on, like, say, Greek mythology? And I don't have an answer to that question. I want to be praised for being creative because I think when you're an artist, what you want to be praised for is being inventive, being innovative, being able to create like new things from old things. And when I made a lot of stuff up, like reviewers who are mostly not Asian cannot tell what is authentic and what is not. So like for like even for like a non-Asian person to tell me something is feels authentic, I'm just like, how do you know? Because if you don't have the education background or like the personal background, then you don't really know what's authentic. But so like this is kind of where I just get really skeptical when people try to say it as praise. And the other reason I'm allergic to concept of authenticity is that I said people, but it's really white people. White people keep trying to out Asian people of the diaspora. Like, it's not just in terms of like art, but it's also in terms of like trying to like emulate our culture and telling us that we're not as Chinese as people who have no Chinese heritage. And it's pretty weird. And like when white people used to get better grades than me, they'd be like, I out Asianed you. And it's like, okay, that's weird. So it's like authenticity becomes a bludgeon that is like really commonly weaponized against Asian people, and it's annoying. And also, I make mistakes about my culture all the time. I don't know if anyone else can relate, but I just straight up goof my culture. Like, I'm just like, I say something and then my parents say that is totally inaccurate. I'm like, okay, cool. And so really the problem is not about getting it accurate. The problem is that who's taking up resources, who's getting the money to make art about this heritage. And I really think it's an ethnocentric way to view marginalized art from the lens of how accurate is it? Because it feels like anthropology. It doesn't feel like art. It feels like anthropology. And like, why is accuracy important? Because there's like 5 million riffs on Shakespeare. I think there's a whole movie called Romeo plus Juliet that's like guns. There are guns involved in that movie. And I'm just like, okay, so like we can have 5 million weird riffs on Shakespeare, but we can't have any like slightly deviant art about our own culture. And that to me, that's just not cool. And so I really want to talk about the possibilities beyond having to represent things. Like, what if we just made weird self-indulgent shit? I spent years on anime roleplay forums. I'm not afraid to admit it. But a lot of art made by people of color there was energy swords, cat boys with vibranium claws, shady doomsday cults that wanted to end the world by taking advantage of an apocalypse. And honestly, that was just really good stuff. Like, and it was really like unique to what we could do because we had our own perspectives that we could bring into telling stories about impractical swords. And to me, what's really important is that our aspirations, like our weird aspirations, like telling stories about people who can shoot fireballs from their hands. That's part of us, you know. Like, and I think it's really disingenuous to be like because it's not traditionally associated with your culture, then can't be authentically part of like what you experience as like a member of that culture. It's like, no, actually, like if you want to like make a game about kissing dragons or like starting a bakery, like that to me, like that's pretty authentic because you wanted to make a game about kissing dragons or starting a bakery. So that's kind of how I've just started moving beyond like how I think about authenticity. I think as long as you're making art for yourself or you're making art for like community or like you're making or like basically like even if you just like settle on making art for yourself, that is to me is like pretty authentic because it's you. And so, and the other thing that I've tried to bring into my own game making practice is to be selective with culture. It's because, like, when I was doing like research about the first Opium War for Lion Killer, I was so overwhelmed by historical knowledge. And I mean, actually, not that overwhelmed because I had a history degree. I was not that overwhelmed. But there's just so much information out there. And I'm just like, do I include everything? Do I include every battle? Do I include every correspondence that the emperor had with Queen Elizabeth? Victoria, sorry. Um, and the thing is, you don't have to do that. I just only use the parts that, only the details that were useful for the plot. And I mean, this is also what white people do for plots. Like, they just take the parts of European culture that are useful for the plot and they throw out everything else. I mean, and that's a totally valid way of telling a story. Um, and so I just like when I was making Lion Killer, I just like used information that contributed to narrative tension and just kind of like kept aware of the themes while also just like not feeling as pressured to like include every historical fact or like even facts that would make the plot too complicated. It's like it's okay to do that. Don't have to make sure that it's the definitive Bible to like understand your culture. No, no, you do not have to make the Bible. So yeah, more some of the reception that I got for making Lion Killers that people were assuming that I masterminded this game for an explicit agenda to like tear down a non-existent British Empire. I was just kind of like, that sounds exhausting. I mean, I make political games, but I don't make them for like, specific political agendas because that's exhausting and that's just not fun. And the reason I set the game in the 19th century is just because I really enjoy researching the 19th century. I mean, I got a history degree, so like clearly this is stuff I enjoy. I like modern history because there's like more documentation and it's fun to like look through people's like dirty secrets. And so I'm a huge research geek. I used to sleep at the library when I was in university. And so like it was really like not so much about agenda so much as like I did it because I liked it. And like what happened to making stories that were more about your own enjoyment than it was about like clinging to some like nebulous idea of like authenticity. So all of my talks basically circle back to the one idea of making games is so hard. Like it's so hard. I just like every time I open Unity, I just want to cry. And then I watch Netflix for a while because I just trick myself into thinking that having Unity open is making the game. And so I think it's important to like keep aware of like don't let authenticity get in the way of having fun. Let yourself get things wrong for like the rule of cool. Like if something about like your history, cultural history isn't fun, like you can just like play around with it or like not use it or something to like make it fun. I mean, like obviously you're responsible, like don't erase like something horrible that your culture has done, but like, you know, like, but it's kind of like let yourself like just like use bits of your own culture to make something new. And so like no matter what your peers think, no matter what your parents think, because I know this is the big one, you're only a culture ambassador if you really want to be. Like if you really want to be a diversity consultant, then do it. But don't let yourself feel like you have to, because like you're an artist and you should be allowed to create art that makes you happy like everyone else. So yeah, thanks for sticking by with me. You can find me at my website, at my Twitter account, and at my itch.io account. Come and like buy my games if you want.
Thank you so much, Sisi, for that talk. Now, after listening to all of that, I am fully convinced that I can create a game where an African boy becomes the avatar and then goes on to go back in time and make sure that his parents go to the under the sea dance so that he's born. I know that's not at all what you said, but that's what I heard, so that's what I'm going to do. But thank you so very much, Sisi. For those of you who are watching at home, hopefully listening to this and hearing this makes you feel a bit more comfortable about ignoring the critic in your head and just making sure that you have fun with your game, something that you believe is going to click with your audience. So tell us how you feel in the comments, share, like, ignore the critic, and remember that authenticity is boss. All right?